So welcome everyone to the Cohasset Planning Board meeting of Wednesday, August 26, 2020. The time is 6:32. This meeting is being facilitated by Jen Oram, Lauren Lind, and it is being facilitated by Eve Tapper, who is the peer support for the planning board. We have all the planning board members here, and just to refresh people's memory, this is a public hearing on Chapter 40A and 300-124 and 300-12.6 of the Cohasset zoning bylaws for an application filed by CHI LLC for a Harbor Village Business Overlay District Special Permit and Site Plan Review approval for subject properties at 87 and 124 Elm Street. And we are continuing from August 5th. We have a series of members in attendance who will be making presentations. We have the developer here. We have our peer reviewers here. And we also have the public who will be asked for comments after all of those individuals have spoken. I'd like to ask that members of the audience who wish to speak let Jen Oram or Lauren Lind know that they wish to speak, and they need to state their name and address, and you can communicate with them via the chat. The etiquette for the meeting will be that if your question in the period of time in which we are going back and forth and discussing items, if your question was answered or asked and then answered by a previous person, we ask that you do not repeat what you wish to say, simply because of time constraints. We're recording the meeting, and every issue will be converted from the discussion into statements of concern and given to the developer where appropriate. The meeting tonight has three components associated with it, or actually two major components, which are the architecture and the affordable housing component of the project. The plan of the meeting is that the developer will speak first, and they will cover all of their information that they wish to disclose in the initial discussion first. This will be followed by comments by our peer reviewers. That will then be followed by individual planning board members, and will go by alpha order. Then we will open it. We'll ask for clarifications if there's a need for clarifications. Otherwise, we will go to the public, and we will collect information from the public. We will then circle back and ensure that the planning board members have had a complete summation of their points. We will confer with the developer to make sure that they have actually captured the information that we discussed, and we will ask them explicitly to list out the items that they recognize. And then we will eventually close the meeting by figuring out when we're going to meet next. So if no one has any concerns, I see Paul Colery here at this point. So let's begin. Lauren, would you like to start and say anything?
Certainly, thank you, Amy. I would just like to also state for the members of the public in participation, for any comment that you'd like to make, we just ask that you insert into the question and answer your name and address. And when it is time to take public comment, we will call you in the order that it's received. And again, just a reminder that if we're asking, please not to repeat any questions that have already been asked and answered, and we will take them in an according manner. So with that, I will turn it over to Ted Lubitz with the applicant, and he can introduce his team. Ted, I did give you screen sharing capability for your presentation.
Thank you. I think actually George is going to be doing the introduction, so I'll turn it over to him.
I got a better microphone than he does. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending. A couple of items we wanted to address first before we got into tonight's topics. So at the last meeting, we had gotten 36 comments from the board. various comments regarding affordable housing, landscaping, architecture, the commercial space, condominium documents, traffic. And so we have been working on addressing all those items. A number of those items will be addressed tonight when we talk about affordable housing and we talk about architecture and landscaping. A couple of items that from last week's or the last meeting that we wanted to clarify and let you know is that the ownership issue has been resolved. The deeds have been recorded, so that issue should no longer be an issue. And the other thing is that we have been meeting, as you know, with abutters and other neighbors within the town that have expressed interest. We had a good meeting with Chris McFarland, who took the time to put a lot of comments together. And so we spent about an hour with him last week going over, and we will be incorporating actually some of his comments. He had some good ideas for us. So those will be incorporated into the project as we continue to move forward. Tonight, if there's not a preference, Lauren, about whether we do landscaping, architecture, or affordable housing, we might as well do the architecture and landscaping first, if that's okay?
That's all right.
So again, a lot of what you're going to see tonight, and we're going to have Sean Malloy from CBT walk you through the presentation. A lot of what tonight is not rehashing of what you've seen, but actually addressing, again, a number of the issues that were raised for, like, for example, the view corridor and different perspectives of the street, et cetera. So I'll turn it over to Sean and let him go through the slide deck that we prepared.
George, I just want to comment that the way in which we imagined this meeting was not that you were going to respond to the items of the previous discussion, but that you would focus on the items that were this meeting was organized around. And the reason that we believed that would be the way we would go is largely because of time. And so you're making a choice in going over items that we would otherwise come back to after we've heard the entire meeting content. And that was the original reason for why we're holding this meeting tonight.
Okay, so let me, Madam Chairman, let me clarify. We are going to be talking about landscape and architecture as per the agenda. My point was that the board raised a number of issues in the last meeting about architecture and landscaping, and all I was saying was that we're addressing those points within tonight as well, as part of, for example, there was a question about where did our concept for the design came from. So we're going to, that's going to be part, that is obviously part of the landscape and architecture. So all I was saying was that we are taking the agenda items of landscape and architecture, and that fortunately some of the items that the board raised are included in tonight's hearing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Okay, just trying to get the screen. So Ted, do you have that, or?
Lauren, can you let Sean share his screen, please?
Yes, let me find him in the, okay.
Thanks.
Sean, you should be able to share your screen now. Sean, are you able to share your screen?
I'm not. Ted, do you have the presentation, Ted?
Yeah, Lauren, if you give me the right to share the screen, I'll do it.
You do. Are you not able to share your screen either?
He's working on it.
Okay.
All right, great. Okay, so Ted, are you going to drive and I'll just, okay, perfect. Great. Well, thanks, George, for the introduction there, and good evening, Madam Chair, Planning Board members, all others. As George mentioned, my name is Sean Malloy. I'm an architect with the Cohasset Hospitality Partners team. And to begin, Ted, why don't so we just had some overall bullet points. These are the ideas and information we'd like to just touch on tonight. And it's relatively swift in terms of our presentation. There's a master plan analysis, which we'll speak to from a macro scale, some precedent research, which we'll flip through pretty quickly, some site assessments, as George mentioned, in response to comments and conversations that have been ongoing, massing studies, and then ultimately some perspectives, which we heard a lot of interest in and requests for last time. So to begin with our next slide here, we offer context just quickly to our master plan analysis. The project site, artfully positioned on Cohasset Cove, of course, less than a half a mile from downtown, and nested, amongst the neighborhoods of these streets: Elm, Border, Margin, and Summer. We've spent much time in and around the areas over the past year, actually year and a half now, studying and focused upon the property, as well as the surroundings and the contributing effects. We've witnessed the activities and the uses in the area, taken note of the forms and the frameworks of the buildings and housing of the entire neighborhood. So mindful of this architectural and natural fabric, which is so evident here and also so successful. On the next slide here, our design approach, for this project has led us to research and consideration of New England shingle style architecture, as you see here on this slide and the next. These are precedent examples for coastal residence locations, and have sought to inspire this design process. Continuing right to the local area here, found tremendous representation of this architectural form here in Cohasset on these streets. You folks will probably recognize some of this stuff on Forest and Jerusalem Road, as well as Atlantic and Border here in this slide. So here too, considerate of all these forms, which are so prevalent throughout the area. As we continue on, of course, with this style of architecture, there's the detail within the craft of the shingle style. And here we show some graceful arches, some gable, sweeping gable detailing, as well as some shingle swales and some window flares. All these elements considerate of this style of architecture, and become part of our vocabulary as we go forward. In turn, we contemplate the hardscape and how our buildings meet the landscape. And with this consideration, we've looked into cobblestone approaches, pavers, box gravel, and grass articulation. Collectively, as we consider all of these elements, we have this tremendous opportunity for this truly unique property. From a master plan and harbor plan perspective, our team goals are multiple in number. We strive for our pedestrian activation, as you see illustrated here along the Elm Street corridor, with a reclaimed view to Cohasset Harbor. At the harbor, the walk along the water's edge has been achieved from Border Street to Margin Street. The connectivity for this Cove neighborhood has been strengthened for pedestrian and bicycle access. The character of the harbor area is advanced forward with a vibrant mixed use of multifamily residential, increased public access, and amenity features. So, the creation here, a very dynamic Cove neighborhood right here on the water's edge. Next slide. As we look at our master plan and we move to align such with our vision, as we move to align our master plan visions with our zoning analysis, here we offer some representation of those studies. As you see from the existing site versus the proposed, there are notable gains with the view corridor and the public accommodation on the cove edge, as you see in the comparative site plan illustrations. The photographic image and representation below speak to the visual opening across the property. The diagrams adjacent present a comparison of the building massing, with the proposed demonstrating residential roof lines sloped back from the street and stepped forms around the envelope, all to soften and better integrate to the neighborhood aesthetic versus the more boxed mass form of the existing hotel. This diagram also illustrates our conformance to the zoning height requirements of 35 feet above base flood elevation and a 40-foot maximum. You should also note that these are just diagrams. So in the diagram of the proposed, it appears that there's a flat roof condition when in fact there are really no flat roofs being proposed. Anything flat is contained within a well within the roof line, but fully shielded from view. I think that swiftly kind of gets us through that overview. And from here, I'd like to hand it off to our landscape architect partner, Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm with Clever Martin Design Group. I'm going to try to unpack the site plan a little bit, and doing so kind of address some of the questions that we heard. And so this diagram is the sort of landscape design parameters diagram that we started out with in the beginning of the project. The red dashed line shows the Chapter 91 boundary, and within that, between the dashed line and the seawall, there are two sort of public land zones. There's the water dependent use zone and then the facilities of public accommodation. Within that water dependent use zone, there's the 10-foot harbor walk and the 25-foot no build setback. And then the Elm Street corridor, which is aligned with the south side of Elm Street. One of the questions that we heard was, have we done any FEMA analysis? And we actually have done quite a bit. And so we really felt like we wanted to kind of reveal that part of the site design a little bit. So the site sits on 3 FEMA zones, base flood elevation 11, 10, and 9. And the guidelines that we're following is that the building first floor elevation needs to be a minimum of 1 foot over the base flood elevation. So 124 Elm is actually set to elevation 12, and the landscape slopes and steps up to support that so that it's not like a sort of walled condition. And then at 87 Elm, the first floor retail is set to elevation 10, so 1 foot above. And then the residential is actually set to 15, so quite a bit above.
May I interrupt? Is there, Ted Lubitz, is there any way to zoom these a little bit?
Yeah, yes, what would you like to zoom in on?
Well, just make them a little larger for my old eyes. That's cool. Thank you. It might be too much, but that's it. Yeah, it's good. Thank you. And if you could keep doing that going on, I mean, some of these slides have just been hard to see.
Okay, yes, and if there's a specific question, just let me know and I can zoom in on
I
specific.
appreciate it. Thank you.
So the next slide. One of the questions that we heard actually from a number of people across both of the previous planning board meetings was, how do you know when you're in the public park that you're in the public park, and how do you know when you're in the private park, and where is that line? And that's a really good question, because we purposefully tried to hide that line as much as possible so that when you're in the public park, you get the shared view of what's going on in the condo area. And then same when you're in the condo area, you get the shared view across the public park. So that line is that thick red bold line, and it's characterized by a wall and then an 8-foot wide hedge. So very dense, very tall planting, or not very tall, but tall enough that it's kind of hard to cross that line, and that you have to cross that line with intention, and that there are 2 points where you can do that through a gate. The other thing that we wanted to show with this public open space is that we actually exceed what the Chapter 91 designation suggests, most notably in that northeast corner headed towards Margin Street. So the buildings are purposefully put towards the street edge, and what we're trying to do is create a sense of a neighborhood, that the doors are facing the street, that there are more eyes on the street, and that you start to create this sort of front porch, front stoop culture where people are part of the street, not necessarily just in their homes. And then trying to be really strategic about where we place those open spaces to further support the view corridors. So not only the view corridor on Elm Street, but also the view corridor that goes right through the 2 124 Elm buildings, and then also through the parking lot. So the new Harbor Walk has a series of rooms that are connected to it, and those rooms offer different programmatic opportunities. So there's the vet park at the far end, which is not on our site, but experientially part of it. The public parking, the sloped harbor lawn, the harbor terraces, which offer spill out from the retail and are more of like a plaza or patio feel, and then the Margin Street Park. And the Margin Street Park is noted where it is because as we think about seasonal or annual festivals, such as maybe the art festival, having an opportunity to have an installation or a tent or a kiosk right on the street to draw people in towards the park, we think is a good opportunity. And then historically, the hotel is kind of right on the edge of the Margin Street property line, and so really trying to extend the sidewalk that's there as far as we can on our property line to help facilitate that town dock connection. And then we've already talked a lot about parking, but just wanting to reiterate that there is public parking on the site, and that that's been integrated into the public park, and that even with the additional level of resiliency that we're trying to add through the FEMA analysis, that we are committed to an accessible path of travel that gets you to the retail zone. And if it looks exactly like this, it's likely to change in order to maximize the use of that sloped lawn. So this is the illustrative site plan, and hopefully it kind of helps to unpack it a little bit more, answer some of the initial questions, and keep the conversation going.
Return back over to Sean for the additional renderings.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ted. In response again to these previous conversations we've been having, there were, a series of comments and requests that seem to work towards, we need more renderings, so, and more views and perspectives. So in response to that, we've prepared several different views here, and to share these now. I mentioned that as we zoom in, through these, that these are really conceptual in nature. So some of the detailing gets a little thin. I think you guys will understand if we look pretty close. But from an overall perspective, let's show some of these. So this view, a bird's eye view from Border Street. This presents both buildings, both 124 and 87, in the full neighborhood context. Clearly illustrates the view corridor from Summer and Border Streets across the edge of the property, across the water, towards Margin Street. And also demonstrates the availability of that waterfront, to the public along the Harbor Walk and the public realm there. This next slide is the exact same view superimposed with the existing massing of the hotel. We've heard in again, plenty of the conversations before about, what is the comparison? And this is meant to just offer a quick look at the two in conjunction with one another. And as you can see, the mass of the form that exists today imposes upon any views laterally across the site, and as you can sort of perceive, down the view corridor of Elm or through the center, and also certainly doesn't afford the same integration at the water's edge. This slide, which is spectacular in its vantage point, offers a view clearly of the primary view corridor down Elm Street, and sees how nicely that stitches together with the waterfront. It also gives a glimpse of the found corridor through the property in between the north and south of 124 property. And then, of course, there's that prominent view corridor from Summer and Border right across the site to the north, and the opening of the water's edge again in its full splendor here in this view. The next slide, fairly dramatic in, again, the imposition of the mass of the existing building and just what is not being achieved today that could be tremendously improved. So this mass showing how it occupies the site and stands in the path of several of those opportunities. This next, again, we heard the interest in some pedestrian perspectives. So this photo, as things look today, I guess actually I should say as things looked yesterday, I think this was taken yesterday, and this is the view obviously down Elm Street, and at the far end you can see the imposition of the hotel as it exists today. So in comparison to this real life photograph, we have our proposed, which clearly illustrates the opening at the water's edge and into the harbor for a view corridor. And it demonstrates how the residential form of the proposed building at 124 frames this view in compatibility with the residential profiles on the north side of Elm Street. So in a very suitable, expected neighborhood fashion. Continuing closer down Elm, we see that same effect, and you begin to actually get a feel for the architecture and the profiles offered at 124, and you can see how the edges are softened and everything is moving back away from the street while still offering that pedestrian scale. Another pedestrian look at Elm Street as the road begins to bend to the south. In this image, note the sensitivity to the existing neighborhood fabric and scale, the use of the materials, stone, the wood shingles, the painted trim, copper, glass, and the proposed relief across the facade, as I mentioned briefly before, with openings at the street level, the recessed elements and the stepping back along each face, the accent detailing, and then the careful roof design, inclusive of the chimneys, the gables and gambrels, the dormer features, and oftentimes these roof elements dressed in this soft edge as it transitions to the body of the house. This future vision, if you will, depicts our full engagement that we seek. We have the harbor, the public, the residential element, the amenities, all existing here together in a certain harmony. So a vision for what could be here at this corner. Then we consider 87 Elm from a different position. This perspective, pedestrian view on Elm Street. This is looking to the north or the northwest, with the Legion building in the foreground to the left. The proposed 87 and 124 residential forms, nest on either side of the street in respect to one another. From the Island Green at Elm and Margin Street, we see these, classic expected roof lines at 87, the strong chimney, the New England wood shingles, and the stone palette in harmony. This compilation in keeping with and complementing its neighbors, both here immediately as well as, throughout the Cohasset community. To conclude, this aerial photograph, as it is today, you can see the hotel as as graphically represented in the earlier SketchUp models, and then the same beautiful photograph of Cohasset Cove as proposed. I think that's the last slide there, Ted.
Great. So we'll turn it back over to George and we'll go on to the next topic.
So the last major topic to be discussed is the inclusionary zoning bylaw and the incorporation of how we're going to handle creating affordable units because of the project. So under the current bylaw, pull up on the screen. Can I share, Lauren?
You should be able to share. Do you have a share screen at the bottom?
Yeah, I see it. That's the wrong slide. So our bylaw requires that if you build more than 5 units, 10% of the total build has to be affordable either on-site or off-site. And the bylaw says that if it's off-site, then a payment would be made to the Affordable Housing Trust and or Steering Committee. We understand, and I know that there's members on tonight, that there is not yet a specific dollar amount for payment in lieu of creating the site, the affordable housing. So what we've been doing last few months is looking at other towns and seeing what they do for this situation. And as you can see, 3 of our closest towns, Hingham, Hull, and Norwell, do not have an inclusionary bylaw for affordable housing. Situate has one that I believe was just passed this year in 2020. Marshfield has one, but it includes talking about if you want a density bonus. So if you're allowed to build 10 units and you want to get 12 or 15, then you would participate in their inclusionary bylaw pilot payment. Duxbury has a similar program to us where, although they start at 6 units, you can do it either on-site, you can do it off-site, and then they have, if you do it off-site, you can also do a payment to the Affordable Trust of $200,000 per unit. So that's the missing piece that Cohasset does not have but is working on as of now. What we would like to do, and in conversations we've had with the chairman of the Affordable Trust and the chairman of the steering committee, is we would not just like to give those committees funds, but we would actually like to create the units so that the money does not sit in a fund and waiting for opportunities. We're going to create the opportunities with those committees. Ted has got 15 years of affordable housing experience. I've got experience with Habitat. We're in conversations with Habitat. They have a model that we believe makes a lot of sense. There's a potential project coming up in town that we're talking with, partnering on. And one of the things that the Habitat director had said to me was that typically they get the land first and then they got to figure out the funding. In this situation, we would actually provide the funding first. So it's a unique opportunity for Habitat. And it also would pull the Cohasset project to the top of the list. They currently have 3 or 4 other projects that are ongoing. And if they did get the project that Cohasset is looking to put an RFP together, they would bid on it, but it would then sit on a pile until they got the other projects done, and then they go out and look for fundraising. So by partnering with Habitat, we could actually accelerate significantly the actual creation of the units. The other options that we're looking at is talking to existing landlords about deed restricting their units for workforce or affordable housing. And we've identified a half a dozen potential units in town, and we're starting conversations with the landlords about doing just that exact thing. So what we're trying to do is not just give a check to the affordable housing and the steering committee to go do something. We're going to actually do it with them. And what we're looking tonight is for the board to give us their blessing to allow us to continue down that path. So with that, I open up to questions about what we've presented.
Any questions would be of a factual nature for clarification. If there are no questions, then we would move on to our peer review.
Clark's got his hand up.
Oh, I can't see.
Yeah, the zoning bylaw under inclusionary zoning does have the off-site locus option that we put in on purpose. So that it sounds like what you're doing makes sense, and just like to say, so far that sounds reasonable. Although the board will have to vote on whether we as a board want the inclusionary zoning units as a part of the development. But in terms of what you're doing so far to flesh out the option of offsite or the payment in lieu of, I think what you're doing so far makes sense. I do. So that may be a discussion that Amy, you want to pull up. I do have a question about the architecture, and particularly about the landscape. There's what looks like a ramp that bisects the big lawn.
You will pull that up, Ted?
And I wondered, I didn't get any of the reasons for that for the ramp bisecting the lawn, or whether it's got handrails or solid guardrails, or just exactly how that's constructed. And I guess I just wondered, is it because it bisects this large public space and as an obstruction? I'm wondering if it could go to the north, parallel to the main walk. I mean, it essentially looks like the purpose is to get people from that retail deck area to the 10-foot wide walkway. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, so we had initially wanted to do like a shortcut or a cut through, but you're right, there are handrails on it, and being totally self-critical, we don't like that either, and do plan on adjusting that path location and slope so that we don't have handrails that are blocking the view, and that it works better for the intended program of the sloped lawn.
Okay, Jennifer, you are allowed to do, I think, 1 to 20 without guardrails. It's not technically a ramp once it's over 1 to 20 slope.
Right. So it's currently it's
1 to
currently
19.
8%.
Yeah,
So, and we don't want it to be like that. And so it is going to change.
but you're also showing a handicap ramp on the north side of that retail deck area.
Yeah.
Connecting in. So I guess I'm wondering if it's a path that bisects the lawn that's made of hardscape or something. I guess no problem. But you don't need secondary ADA access to the public walkway. I don't believe it, and I guess I'm wondering why you have it, and since you already have it on the north side.
Yeah, so you're right. We only need one path, and so we could do that. We wanted, initially it was about creating the shortest route possible to the retail, and but the slopes make it something that we don't think is going to work with the design ultimately. So, but initially the idea was that it was this 1 to 20 path that cuts through the lawn and kind of breaks that up a little bit and allows a shortcut through the lawn. But we're gonna fix that.
Well, I understand, like at Harvard Yard, all those paths were created by people walking on the grass, and then they paved them over because there was nothing they could do to stop people from walking. But in this case, you're creating this, sort of large public space, but then you're bisecting it with a sort of raised guardrails and handrails, and so I'm just wondering if you're rethinking that, that makes sense to me.
Yes, we are rethinking that.
Okay.
Is that all your comments, Clark?
That is, those were my comments. Oh, one more is, I didn't see a detail of the guardrail that goes to the ramp into the parking area. I'm sure there'll be one, but I think it makes sense to show the board what that looks like at some point.
All right. So let's move on to allow the peer review to make the presentation.
Can I ask just a question?
Yes, you can ask the factual question.
Just, all right, so Jennifer, when you were talking about where the first floors of the proposed buildings are, I believe you said they were anywhere from elevation 9 to 15. Is that correct?
So 87 Elm, the ground floor retail is set to elevation 10, and then there is an interior stair and elevator that takes you to the units, which is at elevation 15.
And then the other building?
In 124 Elm, the ground floor units are set to elevation 12, and Sean, feel free to correct me if I'm misquoting.
No, those are the correct numbers, yes.
And in comparison, where are the elevations of the existing buildings, the two buildings today?
Can you speak up, Tom, please?
I'm sorry, in comparison, what are the elevations of the floors and the buildings today?
John, Kevin, do you have that information handy?
.124 Elm is closer, it's about a foot lower than that. It's a little between 10 and 11 feet. And 87 Elm is right around 9. So it's about a foot. They're both about a foot lower.
And my other question was, again, on these drawings, I made comments before about I don't like the bird's eye view. They're useless to me. I guess, 20 years ago, I couldn't ask this question because we wouldn't have had the technology, but these buildings are being brought closer to the street. They're going to be taller. Is there any way, improved with some of the pictures today, but I'm looking for a comparison of today and what's proposed. Is there any way to superimpose, and I noticed in a couple of drawings you started out with the current building footprint. It seems large to me. I don't know if the scale is correct, but is there a way from the sidewalk, pedestrian, and driver view, we can see the existing buildings at both sites and the new buildings superimposed over them so that people know what they're actually going to see walking on the street, which really is the only thing that matters. Bird's eye view doesn't matter to anybody. I don't know if that's possible, but I mean, great steps were made tonight towards that. But for example, when you go back quickly to the dotted line of the footprint of the existing building, do I know that's the scale compared to your new building? I don't know that. I mean, that's for I guess our consultants to verify for me. But my concern about this has been that people in this community understand what's going to be put there compared to what's now. Thinking it's going to be, the biggest complaint is it's a wall. Well, it's an ugly wall, and this is just a new, prettier wall. But I want people to get a sense of the scale and the size of this compared to what's there today.
So we're really talking about superimposing that screened image.
In that view you're showing right now,
Right.
where's the hotel compared to that? I mean, in
Right.
true scale, I don't want you to say that the hotel is massively larger if it's not massively larger. It's certainly shorter than the existing building. But I would love to see that because again, I'm not so much for me as for the community because I don't think people appreciate this. I got a call this week from a citizen, approve this, you should approve it quickly. No, I shouldn't approve it quickly because I don't think everybody understands what the replacement is going to look like. And this is for the next 50 to 100 years, so we need to do it right. And we have that technology, so I'd love to see it. Both buildings. My concern about the 87 building is that it also is larger and it directly abuts residential properties, and I have not heard from any of those owners. I don't know if they care. I don't know if they've seen this, but they're going to have a massively larger building next to them than they do today. And I think we should see that if we can do that with technology. That's it.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I can address that concern, we will talk with the architects about doing something like that. But everyone that has seen the project from the abutters, from the hundreds of abutters and neighbors that have seen the project, we haven't gotten any honestly negative feedback. And I know that the planning board has gotten some letters. In fact, one of the letters is from the direct abutter to 87, who I don't have his language in front of him, but he says he's seen the plan and he's looking forward to it. We have honestly told abutters and neighbors not to contact the planning board because we don't want them we don't want you besieged by the abutters and the neighbors at this point in time, because this is still a due diligence period for all of us. So if you do look at the comments though, that from the few that have sent it in, they all have seen these plans. And I don't know one of them that has addressed an issue. Yes, there's a building there now that's ugly. And yes, there will be a building there in the future. What we're doing is taking the building that's on the water and moving it back and making it better. That is exactly what is happening.
I appreciate that, but I think it is, my understanding of what happened 50 years ago is a lot of controversy. Nobody expected what was being built there was going to be built there, and then they've got this ugly building. I just want people to be aware of what it is going to actually look like. That's all.
We appreciate that. If you haven't seen it, we have an office right down on 87 Elm with about a half a dozen of these in the window with information where people can contact us and they can contact the planning board with any comments, and that has been up for a couple months now. We will continue to talk with any abutters in any neighborhood neighbors that are interested in the project. And one of the things that we were looking to do was to get examples of the size of the buildings. So if you go stand at Pilgrim Bank, so you can get a kind of a sense of what the height is from the street. If you stand in front of the Red Lion, that's higher than what's going to be there. So we will attempt, Madam Chairman, to answer the question for the board member about doing it in plan, but it's probably going to be easier if we point out locations in town where you can actually stand and get a sense of the height. You can also stand at the very end of Margin Street now, where the building is now. And that's generally the height's going to be, but it's going to be not there, further back, away from the water, and all of that's being open. So we'll address that and get some examples for you.
All right. Tom is, let's see,
Yeah.
Eric, would you have any comments?
No, I don't have any comments at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay. Paul Grady, do you have any comments?
No, no comments right now.
All right. Then let's move to the peer review discussion, please. Lauren, would you like to introduce our peer reviewers?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to introduce Darren Kirkjian. He is the lead of our team from Weston and Sampson. I'll have Darren introduce the rest of his team members and he'll begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm Darren Kirkjian. I'm the project manager from Weston and Sampson. Just also on the call today from our team is Jim Reardon, our senior technical lead, as well as Caroline Wells, our senior planner, and Miguel Pimentel, the architect, will present the architectural review. I'm going to share my screen just so we can have our slides up. Great. So that was our introduction to our team. And then just to highlight, as many of you know, the review criteria for our peer review highlights the applicant's site plan review and special permit application. In addition, we're looking at the Harbor Village Business Overlay District guidelines. And just to provide some of the dates of our reviews to date, we've provided a memo on July 22nd. We received applicant comments on that on July 29th. We attended and presented those comments in the August 5th meeting, and then last week provided comments back on these the topics of today's presentation. Today's topics, we've resorted them in terms of based on some input from the town. So we're going to first discuss affordable housing, then discuss architecture, and lastly landscape architecture. As with our prior presentation, we've listed our section numbers in parentheses so that anyone looking at this presentation a month down the road can easily reference back to our memo, and the two documents speak to each other. As highlighted findings of like the most significant items for today's discussion, firstly, affordable housing, which Caroline will go into. Additionally, we had flooding comments for the applicant that are referenced both for the underground parking. I know the applicant actually touched on some of these that I'll get back into on the landscape architecture side of the flooding of the actual landscaped areas. So we wanted to discuss and highlight those items. And then lastly, building height, which also was addressed by the applicant earlier in the hearing. Just as shown on the rendering here, there are flat roof areas, and those are listed as flat roof areas on the architectural plans. But we're seeking some additional information on what the roofing will look like. And we did want to highlight as well on this slide, the applicant may have identified solutions to some of these concerns, so we're not prejudging any of these items. And with that, I'll transfer it over to Caroline, and I'll just be advancing the slides so they'll remain muted.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Caroline Wells. I'm an AICP planner, and I have been a municipal planner for 20 years. Just going through some of the questions on affordable housing, this is a little different from the rest of the technical review in that it relies on sort of broader consideration of community goals that are in your master plan and are in your housing production plan. And those are not really questions I can answer for you, but I can kind of give you the overview and anybody watching, if they don't already know, about sort of how affordable housing is governed And so what your options are as you consider, applying your inclusionary zoning standards to this particular project. So affordable housing is governed at the state level by Chapter 40B, which requires that 10% of all year-round units meet a criteria for a subsidized housing inventory. And the key aspect of that is that those units are affordable to 80% of the area median income. And that data is put out by HUD every year. You can look it up online. And so they measure it based on the census. So for Cohasset, you have been in a position of what's called safe harbor from comprehensive permit applications, which means at least 10% of your total year-round housing has been deemed affordable by the state. And so you're not open to comprehensive permit applications. What has happened, or is in the process of happening, of course, we're in a new census year, and Cohasset hasn't kept pace with its affordable housing development as compared to other types of housing development. So the expectation is that you may lose that status, the safe harbor status, when the next census numbers come out. And of course, we just had the census. It does take maybe a year and a half for really those numbers to get appropriately crunched. So we're postulating right now, but we think it might slip under that 10%. And so what that means is that a developer can submit a comprehensive permit application, which is sort of a single paper application, to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And in essence, it allows a much simplified application to one board rather than multiple boards. And it allows that developer to override local zoning. And in some cases, particularly when you have a good nonprofit and you have a good relationship with the community, you can actually get some decent developments out of that. But occasionally, and I would say from my experience more often, is what you get are developments that are grossly out of keeping with either the density or the community character, because the application includes a certain amount of affordable housing. And if the community denies that application, then the applicant can appeal that to the State Housing Board. And if you have not, if it's deemed egregious by the housing board, then they override the local community, essentially. So it's losing safe harbor status is a concern for many communities that have it, and should be sort of in the back of your mind as you think about this particular project and how it proceeds in the timeline as compared to the census and how numbers might roll out. Going to the local zoning, as was touched on earlier, there are a couple of questions that you'll want to ask, and unfortunately I can't just say as your peer reviewer this is what you should do, because these are sort of philosophical planning questions. Right now, the proposal would require 3 what's called local action units. And so those meet the criteria of the subsidized housing inventory. So they have to be affordable to 80% of the area median income. They have to be restricted to those types of households. They have to be non-discriminatory, and they have to be held for a long period of time. It's not defined, but usually it's about 30 years. Sometimes it's longer. And that has to be monitored. So it's not just that it's established, but that you have maybe your affordable housing trust or other mechanism that actually monitors it over time to ensure that it maintains its affordability. For this development, as was mentioned in the memo, because there are 29 units, looking at 3 affordable units or a fee in lieu of. As was noted earlier, those can be on-site or off-site. And so I would, in answering these questions, and of course, none of these are going to be answered tonight, but for consideration, locating any alternative units within town, perhaps refer to your housing production plan, which actually names the village and the harbor area as potential areas for affordable housing. So in other words, you wouldn't want to place all of your affordable housing out on Route 3 or in some particular less desirable area. The idea and the spirit of the housing production plan is that the housing is well integrated with other types of housing within the community. So in summary, the questions for the planning board that I raised through the peer review process is really a philosophical question for you all to consider. Do you prefer units built or the fee in lieu of? As the applicant had stated earlier, there are some obstacles with a fee in lieu of, and the money goes into an account, and then there's a process to find a place to develop and to select a developer and to sort of realize those units. And you are on a bit of a timeline. But if you prefer the development, you could go for a hybrid option, right? So you could do 1 unit required on site or adjacent to the site, and 2 would be fee in lieu of. If you prefer the development, then the question is are they all on site? Are they partially on site, or are they completely off site? So these are the questions that I raised. Can you roll to the next slide, please? And this is just a review. 29 units. There was some discussion that some units would be removed, but the zoning regulations don't really account for removal of units. It's basically your new construction becomes your basis for calculation. You of course should consider your past practices and the spirit of all of your master plan and your housing production plan as you make these decisions. And that's basically the heart of the affordable housing aspect.
All right, so this was an introductory discussion so that everybody understood both what the intent was, where we stand, and some of the options that are known to be commonly found in the profession. So what I'd like to do is to, now does Weston and Sampson want to do their entire presentation and then we discuss the issues, or shall we do affordable housing first, roof second, garage third?
It's up to you.
Yeah, it's up to you all, Madam Chair.
I think I'd rather get all the information out on the table and then we can go back and go through the presentation. Unless there's a point of clarification from a planning board member with regard to the general conversation just provided about the general conditions associated with the regulation.
I have a question, Amy.
Go ahead, Paul.
So if the developer is working with existing landlords and these properties are already standing, so that doesn't help us with the affordable, with the account, to reach our threshold of these, and I'm just for clarification.
Sure, it certainly does. So it could, yeah. So you are on a tight timeline. Essentially, you have a deficit of affordable housing of about 25 to 30 units, depending on how it shakes out by the next census. So you really need to be very aggressive in creating these units. So if you have a structure that's already up and you're essentially entering into an agreement to perhaps renovate it if it needs it, and then create a deed restricted affordability, clause for that unit, that's gonna get you recovering your deficit a little bit quicker than, say, starting from scratch. But that doesn't necessarily negate the idea of having an affordable housing component within the new construction itself. It's just, it is a different timeline.
Thank you.
Clark Brewer, do you have a question? I gather not. Clark, do you have a question?
Nope.
Okay. Eric Potter, do you have a question? I gather not. Tom Callahan, do you have a question?
Not at the moment. No, thank you.
All right. Then let's move on to the next segment of the presentation.
Sorry, Amy, I am here and
Oh,
I cut
okay.
out. Sorry about that. No comment right now.
Okay, thank you. So then we're now going to move on to the roof line.
Yes, yep, and that'll be Miguel. So just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Thanks, Darren. Madam Chair, can you guys all hear me okay?
Yes, Ken.
All righty. So good evening, everybody. The points that I want to bring up, you can see in the slide, one that is not as crucial as the roof heights is the roof-based equipment. One of our concerns was that there will be some sort of a HVAC equipment in this building, and it's not shown in the renderings. So we just want to see some drawings that show that and how they're shielded from view from the street. There'll be a small parapet and railings. So that's not shown, and it's, just to be fair to everybody should know what that will look like once it's built. I know they're very schematic drawings, and usually that's something that comes in later on, the specifics of mechanical equipment. Then jumping on to roof heights. Roof heights, okay. So we noticed, I noticed when I was doing the review, there are flat roofs, especially on the, what is the address? What is the address on that? 1 second, sorry.
124 Elm,
124, yeah. Yes, on 124 Elm Street, there's clearly on the renderings that we had and the elevation that are sort of captive roofs. They are flat, but they are at the height as the ridge lines of the sloping roof. So my concern was just interpretation of the bylaws that said that the roof height as measured from a sloping roof is going to be the mean height from the last floor to the tip of the ridge, and you could go down 5 feet under that. So your ridge line could be 5 feet over that mean roof height. But having flat roofs means that you have to take that as your actual roof height plus a parapet if you need one. In this case, I don't think you're going to need high parapets because you have a sloping roof sort of dying into a flat roof that is sort of captive, as the architect mentioned, that it is sort of, you don't see the flat roof from the outside because it's sloping roof going towards flat roofs. But that flat roof, per the criteria, I think it should be taken in consideration. It might be up to the board to, allow that height to go. On top of that, because of going to the previous point, the equipment that is going to be on the roof is going to need railings, and the criteria for the roof heights are also railings are also mentioned on that the railing is going to be part of the roof height. The only thing that is excluded is chimneys and stacks. So as you can see here in this elevation that's been shared now, the mid roof at 45 feet, it's 5 feet or so under the ridge line, but a section through that elevation, like a cross section, will be great to have to be able to see what the status of those flat roof lines are in relationship to the ridge line. Because for what I can gather on the perspectives, the aerial perspectives, is that you can see the roof line, the ridge lines are pretty much at the same level or height as the flat roofs on 124. On 87, I think they're actually sunken in way below that level, and I think that's not going to be an issue. And also on the small building that is next to 124, that's separated, right? That one I believe is sunken in also. So yeah, you can see that in that perspective that's been shared. the roof on the right side, as seen from the street, it's sunken in behind a ridge line, which will probably be okay. It's going to be under 5 feet. But the roof on the main building on 124, they're pretty much level with the ridge line. So that was just our concern. We wanted to bring up and make sure that, you know, this thing is getting built and this doesn't get brought up later on. So, and then going on to, so the next, like, yeah, residential and non-residential unit for ventilation. We didn't see any space taken for stacks or vertical ventilation on the plans. So we're just concerned how the building is getting ventilated, especially also the parking underneath. So we just want to make sure that's something that's been you know, taken into consideration. Clarification on the HVAC system, we would like to see some of that, and provide detail on how the fresh air or intake, especially on the garage, are being accomplished. So there is a space on 124 and also on 87 slated for public spaces, restaurants, or we're not sure because they're not labeled, but if they're restaurants, we would like to see how those stacks for the kitchen are, you know, shown on the roof line, fire separation to make sure that they're safe and they comply with rules and regulations. And then lastly, clarifying the underground parking ventilation. What I took from looking at the at some of the drawings is that the parking at 87 could be considered open, an open parking structure, if more than 20% of the exterior perimeter of the walls is open. And I'm not sure that's going to be the case since you have a gate. I'm not sure if the gate is open. There's not a lot of detail on that in the front or the back. So calculations on that will need to be made to see if that structure is going to classify it as an open structure. The one on 124, for what I could gather, will be considered an enclosed parking structure, and it will need significant ventilation. So again, on the plans, we didn't see stacks in the floor plans for mechanical ventilation. I don't know if you guys will be planning to use fans mounted actually in the actual parking garage, which is an option. But I didn't see any information either way, and I didn't want to just take anything for granted. And another point was the electrical transformers. They're not shown on site, and just to, you know, be on the side of caution, these things will happen and will come in later on as a final product, and somebody might be shocked at seeing on the sidewalk or someplace in the public area, you know, a big transformer or a generator if needed. My guess is that, you know, generator will not be put on the sidewalk, but a transformer will have chances to be on the sidewalk or a pole. So a drawing depicting where those equipment are being planned to go will be nice. And lastly, which will be touched, another point that will be touched by the last landscape folks will be the underground parking floating equipment location. You guys are shown at this point there's some elevators and access to the underground parking, which in a case of a flooding will be impacted. And we just want to know if you guys are taking any measures to make sure that the flooding doesn't happen in the first place. And if it happens, what are the measures taken to mediate that and make sure that it doesn't happen? And another point is the ADA access to the parking in the back of 87 Elm Street. that parking is a public access parking. But it wasn't clear looking at some of the drawings. In some drawings, it's shown green, which means it's grass paved area. And in some of the drawings, it's shown as paved. And if it's gravel, I had concern both on somebody on a cart and unloading on a wheelchair. How do they get to the front, to the entrance? And also, are people going through the ramp, through the front to access the amenities on 87 Elm Street, or are they going just through the little lobby that you guys show on the ground level, through the elevator and up to the amenities? So that was another thing that wasn't too clear, and we want a clarification on that also. And I believe that was the last point on our end on architecture. So I'll turn it over to Darren.
Yep, thank you, Miguel. So just to wrap up our presentation, we just wanted to highlight a few of the landscape architecture items that we had comments on. We had our landscape architect team review the site plans and renderings. So one of those items which was addressed already by the applicant was the consideration of flooding of the landscaped areas and making sure the plantings are selected to be appropriate for a marine environment. In addition, just kind of following on that, the planting palette, the town has provided on their website a native species list, as well as the Concom has a coastal bank species list. I just wanted to highlight that to the applicant if useful. And then on the walkways and sidewalks, looking at the HVBOD guidelines, masonry pavers and concrete construction, adding a mix of materials are recommended. So we wanted to see clarification from the applicant of what their planned surfacing is. It looked like it was mostly bituminous, so we just wanted to check on that. And then all the walkways and sidewalks will also have to have lighting, and we do understand the applicant is in the process of preparing a lighting plan. So we just wanted to request that includes walkway lighting. And then I believe this was actually shown in some of the renderings today that look like they're updated. We did have a question. Some of the previous renderings showed some trees in the sidewalk, and then some of the plan views showed them like within the property. So we wanted to clarify the location of those trees because the HVBOD guidelines have requirements for if the tree plantings are within sidewalks, they need to have grates. There's some additional requirements, or be in a landscaped area, not an impermeable area. And then just to continue quickly through these, the turf area, the HVBOD guidelines also recommend low water vegetation. So we're just proposing as something to consider as alternatives to turf that may have lower water requirements. And that builds into one of our last requirements is that the applicant prepare a maintenance plan for the landscaped areas, especially because that is, in the previous hearing, we had the retail space or the non-residential space is being offset by the public use park. We want to make sure that has a maintenance plan for operations and maintenance for plantings to be replaced if they're dying off, or and we've provided clarification in the memo of what that may entail, but we did recommend that is provided. Signage has come up previously, but in our parking discussions, but we wanted to bring up again recommendations for signage that also follow from the HVBOD guidelines, wayfinding signage, especially with the public coming to the park, potential kiosks, having, if there's access to that dock for kayaks and other items, we would want to see what the signage plan is. And then lastly, on the landscape architect items, service and loading areas, we just wanted to clarify where those are. They are shown on some plans, and we just wanted to clarify and then also confirm that those have the required screening that's recommended in the HVBOD guidelines. So with that, I know that'll prompt a fair amount of discussion, but we wanted to just thank everyone for your time, and we're certainly available for questions.
All right, thank you very much. So let's just go in alpha order of the planning board members. Clark Brewer.
Yeah, I just want to thank the peer review team for that useful analysis. With the HVAC units, generally, we would want them hidden from view. In which case, you know, if you can't see the unit for 300 feet, maybe it doesn't need to be screened. But also one thing that you guys didn't mention was the acoustics or the acoustical properties of rooftop HVAC units, as well as it seems clear to me as also as a registered architect that the parking for 124 can't be an open parking structure because there's no way to get 50% free area or whatever. I think 50% is the threshold. So there would have to be substantial ventilation under there, and that's also an issue for what it looks like, where these vents go, whether they're shafts that go through the construction to the rooftop, or they vent out the sides somehow, or are buried in the landscape. And I agree with Miguel, the location of transformers should be on the plans, as well as any generators with the acoustical information about the generators, because whenever we lose power in Cohasset, it takes about 30 seconds and the whole neighborhood starts to vibrate. And we wouldn't expect there to be no sound from generators, because we understand that's a particular problematic condition. But for regular operation, like the HVAC units, we would want to know what the sound of the unit, what the specific unit is, and what the acoustical properties are. And whether there's additional acoustic baffling that might be needed on the rooftop in addition or as a part of screening. If those units are in wells, like at 87 and the south building, then the acoustical issues may be largely taken care of.
That is the intent. The flat roofs that are illustrated on 124 is a graphic deceit, if you will. The intent on both properties, all three building structures, is for the flat roofs to be depressed within the roof areas.
Yeah, so you have like a 3 foot or a 4 foot well.
That's correct, yes. So to Miguel's point, it's a very good point that he brought up, but the intention is, as he outlined, for 87, so everything will be depressed and concealed.
That's great. And if they can't be seen, then to a great extent, the acoustical treatment will be taken care of. But it does make sense, I think, to identify the specific HVAC units and make sure that those, or establish the criteria for the HVAC units so that they don't end up being a nuisance to the neighbors.
I would agree.
And there's all kinds of project signage that was brought up. I think one of the last points that would be necessary, and we'd like probably to see as a part of this, the stop sign, the stop lines, all the graphic kind of, whether there's hours for parts of the public or semi-public areas, anything that helps the public understand what's public and private, as opposed, and in addition to wayfinding. Those are my comments on what was just presented by the peer reviewer.
All right, thank you. Tom Callahan, do you have some comments? Questions to be answered? Tom, you're muted.
All right, sorry if I keep beating a dead horse about the height. And I appreciated Miguel's drawing tonight showing the height of the new building. Can somebody in the applicant team tell me just straight out at the ridge line of the roofs you're proposing how much taller it is over the existing building?
Sean, do you want me to pull up that image from our presentation and I can zoom in?
Yeah, that'd be fine, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So as we can see, just in simple diagram form, we've attempted to model our profiles at the extreme points versus the existing. And approximately a 5-foot differential exists between our absolute ridge at the tallest point.
Yep. Okay.
Versus the ridge of the hotel, but not taking into account the additional outbuilding structures on the roof of the hotel.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, does that answer your question, Tom?
Yes, it does. Thanks. Madam Chairman, can I ask a different question? It's a little off the topic, but goes to something George mentioned at the beginning of this presentation.
Yeah, we're doing okay for time. You can do that.
Okay. George had mentioned that the site ownership changed hands. I'm sitting here. I looked it up. Yes, it did on the 11th. But it also made me look just now to see what was going on with the lawsuit with Mr. Roy and Mr. Wardlehigh. And there was also activity in that lawsuit on the 11th and 13th. And I'm wondering if either George or Adam can speak to what was the result of the hearings. Is there any more threat of Mr. Roy having an attachment on this property as a result?
So hold on, sorry, the echo chamber. So we had agreed to not record the deeds until they had at least some preliminary action on their lawsuit between themselves. We did that as a favor to both of them, just because it didn't impact us at the time. And now that we're a year and a half down the road, we had always had control of it. I forget the exact term that the lawyers used, Adam knows it, but just the recording of the deeds was they were being held in escrow. So all that's happened in the last week is it just finally made it out of escrow and they were recorded. So
I mean, I'm assuming you
all-
wouldn't have
that's all
taken.
behind us.
I'm assuming you wouldn't have taken title if there was any
I think
threat.
you're muted again, Tom.
I'm sorry. No, I'm not.
Just talk louder.
I'm assuming that you wouldn't have taken title if there was still any legal threat to the property.
Still can't hear you, Tom.
No, I don't know what to do. I'm not muted. Can you hear me now? No? All right. Never mind.
You can hear Tom.
Tom, what you can do is type it to either Eve or Lauren, and then they can discuss it.
Never mind. It's something we can discuss more offline. It's not,
All right.
not a major issue for tonight. So,
Okay, Paul Grady.
We're all muted.
No questions. I should say I could hear Tom, that's all.
All right, thank you. 1, 2. Eric Potter, please.
No comment at this time.
All right. Lauren, so we've basically had a preliminary discussion from the developer regarding options for the affordable housing. We heard from the peer reviewer some information which provided a context for the application of inclusionary zoning. Do any of the planning board members wish to speak at this time? And I already can see 2 comments with regard to what was said. So I'm going to go to Eve and then I'm going to go to Lauren first.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I just wanted to note that Eve Tapper has had her hand raised for a bit.
Here it goes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question for the applicant. I appreciate the fact that you want to provide units somewhere in Cohasset. So if you're going to spend the money and build them, why do you have a reason why you wouldn't put them on the site? And then I guess this might be a question for Caroline. So if they are actually committing to building 3 units off-site and there are 29 units on-site, does that then make the 10% off of 33, which would be rounded up to 4 instead of 3? Or have you ever come up come across this before. I wouldn't think it would, and I've been trying to read the bylaw to see if it says anything. And I appreciate the fact that the developer wants to put units in the ground. So I don't want to make it more difficult, but just a question as to why it's better to put them somewhere else, and whether or not adding 3 additional units would then knock them up to 32, which would round up to 4. If anyone has any answers.
I can answer actually both of those, Eve. As to the unit count, there's actually 4 units there currently at 87, and they would be coming off. So the net effect is still under 30.
Right. I mean, we briefly discussed that, and I think the peer reviewer indicated that there was no provision in the bylaw for getting credit for the ones that are there. I know I mentioned something that in a memo, but it doesn't quite say that. So I'm just.
No, we're not asking to get credit for the 4 units that are coming off. I'm addressing your question as to whether the total new unit count is in excess of 30 and to the town's count, and it's not.
Okay.
Okay, because you're reducing 4 from across the street. To answer your second question, we've spent a lot of time on the inclusionary zoning affordable housing component. We talked to a lot of different developers. We talked to a lot of different towns as to how they've handled it. One of the biggest issues, and probably the easiest one for anyone to understand, even if you're not in real estate, is if you're putting affordable units within a market rate condominium project, and they're only 10% of the project, the majority owners, the market rate owners, can in 10 years decide they want a new roof that maybe is outside the reserves that have been built up, or they want different landscaping, or they want to change the exterior of the building, or they want to add a pool or a gym. A majority vote of the condominium, only 51% typically, allows those capital improvements to go forward. So what would happen in the future is that the affordable units lose control of their own destiny because another group, their neighbors, have decided to impose additional fees over and above what they expected to pay. That's probably the biggest reason that we, in talking to people throughout the state, have come back with in terms of why it doesn't make sense to allow that. They don't get to control their own destiny. If you put them in a situation where they can fail potentially, that's really not working towards getting the goal of someone getting into their house. So we've talked to people like Habitat. They have a model. I can't think of anybody that's ever had a problem with a Habitat model. They put them into a house that works. They size the house. They ensure that they can afford the mortgage over the 30-year period at a low rate, and all utilities and real estate taxes, capital improvements are all thought into the whole process. And then the homeowner, in that case, gets control what he does or doesn't do, what she does and she doesn't do in the future. She may elect not to add some landscaping in year 10 because she can't afford it. So she's controlling her destiny in that situation. In a market rate condominium, they lose that ability to do that. And that's probably the largest reason why we feel it's more comfortable and better for the homeowner to be in their own situation.
Madam Chair, thank you for your clarification. That's a good point.
Tom Callahan, do I see your hand?
Yeah, if this is a point to comment about affordable housing, let me say a couple of things. But George, let me just ask, are there 4 countable units in 87 right now?
There's 4 market rate units.
Okay.
They're in the
No, I mean in the existing building today. Are any of the units in that building counting toward our town count?
Yes, we were told that 4 units are counted in the housing count.
So this proposal would have us lose 4 and gain 3.
Sorry.
No.
They're not
The
affordable.
affordable housing count, Tom, not the affordable housing count. Those are not affordable units. Those are market rate units.
That's just what I wanted to clarify.
Okay.
The other thing is, I just want to say, I was on the Affordable Housing Committee 15 years ago, the Affordable Housing Trust. I know what efforts this town talks about, but never does. I've been critical that we don't use the inclusionary bylaw. We haven't, as far as I know, and some other larger projects that came forward. I'm glad you want to actually put housing on the ground. That would be a significant change for this community. I'm open to the idea of it being elsewhere. I understand your argument why not put it in this project. I was involved years ago in Boston with projects that had affordable units in market rate condos, and I've always wondered how they turned out and how they coexisted. And perhaps you've answered my question, but I think when we get to the point of decision, though, where you might do this elsewhere has got to be fairly concrete for me to go along with it. You know, Habitat, you say they have other priorities. Well, maybe we'll get to the top of the list if you show up with a checkbook. You know, I'd like to know where these other things are going. I don't want to create a problem somewhere else, you know, by putting housing in the wrong spot. But, you know, I think I would encourage you to go forward exploring all these options. But it would need to be something fairly concrete fairly soon, because we just can't go on a wing and a prayer. And I certainly don't want to leave it where you're just writing a check as a payment in lieu. I think that's useless.
Let me continue, not to have a back and forth and move through the questions. And then
that's all I have to say. Thanks
Okay,
for listening.
Lauren,
where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Tom. Lauren?
Thank you. Just a few points, and then we have a question in the Q&A, and I'd also like to introduce, we have the chair of our Affordable Housing Trust who's joined us, Steve Gomer, and then we also have Paul Kearse and Rob Jeffers from the Affordable Housing Steering Committee, if we would like to hear from them. Before I move on to that, I'd just like to say, one, I wanted to clarify, I did confirm with the assessor's office that, yes, it is for regular market rate, not affordable units counted in our housing inventory stock right now. At 87 Elm Street. I did confirm that yesterday. I'd also like just some points for consideration, really more of questions, is if the units were included to be on site, the affordable units, my question is, I have a concern that DHCD may not, or I'm sorry, if they're on site, is there a way to structure the condominium association documents, the HOA documents, in such that in the future they're worded so that it's not going to burden? Could it be a percentage breakdown? That's a question if they're on site. If the units are placed off site, my question is, when we move forward on permitting, will these be included as units on this permit, or would it be possible to condition for a separate application that would go for a local action unit application special permit? My reason that I'm concerned is that in a previous experience in a different municipality that I used to work in, I saw a similar scenario where there were luxury units being provided that were condominium units, and the units, they were required to do 2 units. They chose a site off-site, and when it turned to DHCD for approval, they turned back and said they wouldn't approve the units to be on the SHI because they were not comparable to the units that were provided on site. So that's just a concern I want to flag and raise. I don't want to get to the point where we, you know, in a future scenario, have approvals for things offsite, and then the applicant has to return to us because there's a problem there with that. So I just want to flag that for consideration, no matter which way this goes. And then at that point, I'd just like to say that Steve Gomer had his hand raised earlier, and if and when you're ready to hear from the Affordable Housing Chair, I would turn back to Madam Chair. Thank you.
So I think all the planning board members have spoken, and our next step then would be.
Excuse me, Madam Chair?
Yes, Paul Collier.
Yeah, I've been here. I've just been, you know, listening in, but I didn't know if you, I mean, I don't really have anything to add, but I just didn't know if you were aware that I was in the meeting.
Yes, I do see you in the meeting.
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nothing, no questions, nothing to share. I, you know, thank everybody for their time and their thorough work on this project thus far.
All right. So as a courtesy to the Affordable Housing Trust, Steve Gomer, would you like to comment?
Thank you. I'm assuming everybody can hear me. I have 3 points that I'd simply like to make from the perspective of the trust, which is really taken at a macro level. It's been brought up on a number of occasions this evening, highlighting the fact that our interest in developing affordable housing and sustaining it here in town really begins to focus as much on volume as anything else. So to the extent that we can create numbers of units, we're in favor of that. If the proponent offers to the town, to the planning board, the possibility of helping us to execute that, then we're all for it. So from a payment in lieu standpoint, the trust would appreciate as much flexibility as they could get for creation and then maintenance of those affordable housing units for years and years to come. We're not really all that interested in the law's current circumstance that defines a 30-year minimum life, because we can't foresee in the next 30 years where the idea of affordability vacates Cohasset. Sustainability becomes another piece, and that's important, as you just heard moments ago, that a unit that is created as being affordable, but then some years down the line is not affordable, is in fact a revocation of what we believe is what the trust should be doing. And so from a fiduciary standpoint, if we endanger an affordable unit by at some point making it or encumbering it such that it is not affordable for the owner at that period of time, then we've broken with our promise, if you will. The third is a recognition of inclusion, and Mr. Callahan of the board has brought this up, and in fact, he's been very consistent with this view for many, many years. And frankly, we embrace it. We also look around the town of Cohasset and recognize that there are any number of places which are just desirable to live. And frankly, the trust is fully in favor of incorporating affordable housing into the mainstream of town. Nonetheless, the first 2 points have to take precedence from the viewpoint of the trust. Finally, this brings up, and it's an observation that the trust had at their prior meeting, and then actually a meeting before that. The payment in lieu bylaw is useful and was welcomed. I can't remember exactly, but Clark may be able to clarify it. I believe that was brought forward about 3 years ago. And we are now recognizing that it is broad enough to be attractive and also broad enough to be non-directive to a developer. And from the perspective that developers current and future may find that to be attractive, that is to say that certainty becomes a very comfortable approach, we would encourage adding whatever certainty could be created or refined by the planning board. That concludes my comments. I hope you'll entertain commentary from Chairman Jeffers of the steering committee and Vice Chairman Kearse from the steering committee, because frankly, the role that they've taken on is one of direction and enthusiastic support for creation of units. And it is their work that created the housing production plan, which guides our efforts. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll sign off.
All right. Lauren, do you want to direct the discussion for the 2 other members of the board of the Affordable Housing Trust?
I will promote them to panelists right now. We have Rob Jeffers is the chair and Paul Kearse is the vice chair of the Affordable Housing Steering Committee.
Great. Mr. Jeffers, would you like to begin and make comments?
Sure. So I'd like to echo Steve's point. We really like the idea of the applicant helping create affordable housing units. I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress in creating the trust and in creating some funding for affordable housing. But just to be blunt and to be honest with this committee, we have created 0 affordable housing units in the past 10 years. So I think leveraging some of the experience of both of the applicants to help us create units would be great. I personally, I mean, this is not on the committee, but personally do not have any issue with the fact that those units are not on the site that they create. If we can create 3 units within Cohasset, I think that would be a win. And I would think the housing production plan that we've created gives the applicants plenty of opportunities to look at. Both of the opportunities that they mentioned, Habitat for Humanity, makes a lot of sense, as well as there are a lot of units that could potentially be converted to affordable housing units without actually having to build anything new, which I know is something that the town is concerned about, in that, like, we don't want to just keep on adding units. So using existing units and turning them to affordable, I think, is also a really good idea. So fully support that, and I think that makes a lot of sense for us moving forward in affordable housing.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jeffers. And then Mr. Kears.
He just agrees with everything I just said, I guess.
Madam Chair, I just received a text from Mr. Kears. He's having some difficulties getting loaded up onto the board.
I see. So can you check that out, Lauren?
He appears to be here. It doesn't look like he's, oh, I'm sorry, he's not here anymore. Oh, there he is again. Hold on one moment. Paul Kears, are you able to hear us?
I can.
Would you like to make comments?
Oh, there we are.
Got it.
Good evening, everyone. Not sure where Rob had made his comments. I was kind of off the air there. Right now, I am in agreement with the applicant of putting housing elsewhere than on the present site. And specific to his reason is that we've identified a lot of areas in town that are more conducive to the affordability, and living in a neighborhood that works with the families that would be there. Outside of being put into a situation where you've got to keep up with the Joneses for the next 30 years, it's a tough thing to do. When we met with Habitat, that was kind of their focus. What Habitat does is they'll go ahead and put in the home, and they provide a lot of financial support from other nonprofit agencies that help those families maintain that home. The family actually owns the home. So they have a mortgage, and the property is usually deeded for 3 years or in perpetuity. And when that home owner exceeds where they are in their life and they decide to sell that home, it still stays deeded as an affordable home. So the town continually is able to keep that on its housing stock as affordable housing. And Lauren, you can help me out with this with the third-party review that we had from Caroline. I'm not sure the information was up to date to where we are, but we don't conform to 40B. We're not at our 10% at all. We're under it, not by a whole lot, but we are under it. And we do not have safe harbor. We put together our housing production plan. We're going to apply for safe harbor for a 1 or 2 year safe harbor. But right now that safe harbor is at risk. And it's at risk because we haven't proceeded with any affordable housing units. There are some affordable housing units that we're hoping to get occupancy by the end of the year at Stop and Shop Plaza. And that's running into issues. I believe your firm presented last night, as a matter of fact, the proposal for the Mass Works grant for putting in sewer. And if that goes through and that works, then we can move forward with getting occupancy by the end of the year, and that would greatly help us. But as our board has determined, and Steve Gomer, is that if this applicant were to put money into the trust, we have CPC money in there, and we have some property that was obtained by the town. So we have assets that we can utilize along with the applicant's asset that will help us bring maybe more than the 3 units. Could bring 4 or 5 units. And they would be kind of scattered around town in various areas that's already conducive to the type of homes that are there. So we think that's kind of best for the long term for the town. And it certainly would count sooner than would putting them on site in the harbor, because we've got things in process right now where it could easily be funded and converted and counted. Thank you.
Laura Lind.
Thank you, Paul. Just to clarify, Carolyn's statement earlier is correct. We are not yet in jeopardy. We, at this current moment in time, are still considered to be over 10% on our SHI, but we are projected to fall below. So that's the intention, to clarify Mr. Kearse's statement just now. We are projected, once the 2020 census is complete, to fall below the 10% of our SHI. So while right now we are technically still in safe harbor, we know that it's a matter of time before we will no longer be.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Paul Grady. You're muted, Paul.
Hi, just a question more for Lauren and also Mr. Kears. I understand because of the COVID that the census counts have been pushed off a little bit. So does that give us more wiggle room to stay away from the 40B? Just due to the census that for COVID guidelines that they'll be coming a little bit later, and so to trigger off any of the 40B getting in the door, for lack of a better word.
Yes, I would say it gives us a little bit more time, but in the general scheme of things, not that much longer. We still know that we will be falling short. Approximately, we're estimated to be 25 units short.
And if Mr. Kears got, if I understood correctly, would we get those units built with that time frame, and would they qualify?
That is subject. I'm sorry. That's just subject to how currently we're projected to get 20 units on account. I'm sorry?
I was asking Mr. Kears, Lauren, the reason being because he had said that. I apologize.
Right, so if there's an occupancy permit at the Stop and Shop Plaza by December 31st, those would count.
Thank you very much.
To the extent that there's a wiggle room for the census, it's not very big because it's what's used to set the congressional districts. And so it's required in the Constitution April 1st of the year subsequent to when it was initiated. So there isn't a lot of time wiggle room. Are there other comments from the planning board members? I'd like to make a couple of comments then. The first comment that I'd like to make is that I would like to see a range of options for the scale of resources that would be provided for off-site housing construction. And I would like to see a couple of examples of the purchase of properties in town that could potentially be non-conforming, could be potentially rezoned to have duplexes or some kind of configuration on them. There are houses on the market right now that are I've seen them at $500,000, $600,000, and $700,000 with property sizes from 67.67 of an acre to 0.71 of an acre. And I would really encourage seeing an example where you're rehabbing properties and you're intensifying properties within specific neighborhoods. And I recognize that that's not the convention that's done here, but it's done in other parts of the country. So that's one thing I'd like to see. I'd like to see more options, and I'd like to see much greater specificity. The second issue relates to the garage door and to the garage and emergency evacuation. I'd like to have some detailed discussion of the security of the garage underneath the building, should there be a flood, and should there be a need for people to evacuate out of the garage on a very rapid basis.
Would you like us to respond to that at this
Yeah,
point?
please.
All right, Sean, would you like to talk about the floodproofing strategy? Also, it was included in our package that was submitted. It was a separate letter from Vetus and Vetus, our structural engineer, detailing the constructability of that. And then, Sean, we can talk about the deployable floodgate and the safety concerns mentioned after that.
Yeah, sure. The intent is that the garage under 124 is fully waterproof. The approach is to go down to bedrock and build off of that bedrock with our foundation walls, the entire inside of that enclosure being fully waterproofed and sealed at all joints. That approach, in conjunction with the floodgates at the surface drive, would ensure that that garage is actually watertight.
An additional point on that as well is that the garage will have redundancy in it in case water does seep in. In the unlikely event it does, what we're talking about is sort of waterproofing those edges, like Sean mentioned, where it does hit bedrock. So there could be some seepage in there, and there would be under drainage and some pump systems to deal with that if it were to come in. With respect to the actual only access into the garage itself, for water to penetrate, it would be through the garage door itself and down that ramp. And so we've designed a deployable floodgate that would be brought out in the event of large tidal events. It's very common practice to be done. I think on the first meeting I mentioned the underground garages in the seaport and elsewhere throughout the world, quite frankly, that are close to water. And so those would come out, and there'd be a certain level of management required, which would be under the condominium association. And the idea would be that cars would not have to leave the garage, but it would be safe. And we would obviously encourage people not to enter the garage during that time period. But the idea is to really make it a self-contained unit that does not accept any water.
So I presume that on this item, we will see more detail about the actual security and water tightness design of the garage. I mean, it's easy to look on the web and see lots of examples where exactly the same system you described didn't work. So I would like to see some examples of them working as this is a question of health and safety. So it goes beyond simply the specific nature of the overlay for the harbor. It's something that we would have to consider for public safety purposes.
Understood.
Mr. McGoldrich, you might be holding the question that you were going to offer a comment to, so I'd like to turn it back to you for a moment.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
You may have lost the train of thought by me pushing on and getting.
Madam Chair, you muted? Oh, I am.
No, I don't think so.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There was a question that you had when we were still going down the list of the planning board members.
I'm sorry, which topic?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's been addressed.
Okay. There was, in the peer review, there was a significant amount of discussion about ventilation and air circulation, and there wasn't very much of that in the materials that you have. I'm going to presume that you're going to carry forth with the ideas and the points that were made by the peer review and provide us with more substantial information on the actual ventilation system.
Yes, we certainly will be doing that.
Great. Do any of the planning board members, peer review members, property owner members wish to make comments? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the public. Clark Brewer?
Just a quick follow-up on the inclusionary component. I agree with you, Ms. Glasmeyer, about that the applicant needs to be very specific about the off-site units. But I think that the payment in lieu of strategy, it's possible that we might be able to encourage the team to look at more than 3 units, in particular if there's town-owned land that's being used instead of actually purchasing property. But what I think is important is that there's a sense of fairness to the applicant as well as to the town with respect to the inclusionary zoning bylaw. It is the planning board that determines what the value is, what's an acceptable value. And it's entirely possible that that acceptable value, and again, I think it needs to be fair based on the unit cost and construction related and sales that's indicated in the zoning bylaw. But it's entirely possible that the developer could help us leverage more units than the 3 that would be required as a part of this development. In fact, if they're off-site, there may be, in terms of what they would lose in revenue for providing the units on site, it may end up working out that more than 3 is reasonable. But again, it's going to be based on the facts and be fair to both the intent of the bylaw and to the developer. And I think we need to determine that in short order so that the developer knows what the board expects or considers acceptable value. Because I think the 5 of us and the analysis that we get, there could be some useful discussion and perhaps disagreement. But I don't think the acceptable value is determined by anything other than a majority of the board. Amy, maybe you and Lauren could powwow about that. Not the supermajority that would be needed to approve of this special permit.
So one thing that I think would be helpful is if Lauren could work with members of the Affordable Housing Trust and to actually think through an array of options that are reasonable and in reach, but with the idea of trying to have variety. It's better to make a choice among different things than to make a choice of only 1 or 2 options. So I feel like we can do some work on our own, but also the property owner can come back to us with examples that may fit well within the town. I still think we do not want to give up the question or the option of considering the units on site. I recognize that there might be some sense that there would be class differences, but that's exactly why inclusionary housing is being made. So I grew up on a street with Keeping Up with the Joneses, and that was my dad running around with the mower. So I kind of have a sense of what that's about. And I just think we want to have as many options as we possibly can, because I think we'll get a better mix of items out of it going forward. And I know that the applicant is capable of getting deeper information than we currently have. Daron?
I just had a question, Madam Chair. Just on the flooding question that was just brought up, I guess 2 topics ago, we would just seek clarification in that structural report. It may have been in one of the files, but we just wanted to understand where exactly that is so we can review.
Right. Yeah, we'll resend it.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And I guess just one question generally too. I know the last memo we got, obviously this was a much more compressed time period. Is the applicant planning to provide a similar response to?
Yes.
And a line by line? Okay, all right, thank you.
May I ask a favor of you? if you could send us that in Word, it would make our response time quicker.
You look like you're looking at me, Ted. Who are you looking at?
Nope.
I'm
Yeah, we
looking
can.
at Aaron.
You're looking at Darren. It's so funny to have that. Like, oh,
He's in the
okay.
center of my screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. So.
Okay, great. Are there questions? So I think at this time we are at a point where we have two choices. We can, the first is I want to allow the public to have a chance to make commentary, also for Lauren, for Eve, or for Jen to make some commentary. But then we can go back through again and simply it might be helpful to review for the applicant, what were the issues that were discussed so that we have a very comprehensive list for this evening's discussion. So first, are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Lauren?
We have a Mike Lennon with his hand raised. I'm going to promote him now. Mike, when I promote you, if you could please state your name and address before your comment.
Video? Sorry. Hi, Mike Lennon. Oh, that screen was on from my meeting this morning. I apologize. I'm not in San Francisco. I'm at 125 North Main Street, Cohasset. I've been following this on and off for the past several months. I grew up in Cohasset, so I have a long history here with family. Recently moved back a few years ago. I just worry, from some of the things I've seen, that we're going to push the applicants to a point where they might give up. And it kind of reminds me of what happened with Amazon in New York City. And they said, okay, you know what, we're out. And I fear that they're going to be pushed to the point of breaking, and that that old dilapidated building might continue to be that way. And I'd hate to see that happen. So I hope we can see the positive side of this and give them some support that they need. It's going to be a great thing. That's all I had to say.
Thank you for your comments.
Are there any other attendees in the audience who would like to speak? If so, could you please input your name and address in the Q&A function or raise your hand? I am seeing none. I will state that we did have questions earlier from our Select Board member, Corey Evans, actually echoing one of the comments that I made about the potential to split condo associations to solve the issue of representation based on value. He did echo that again, so I just want that to be something that noted and for the applicant to consider. And to follow up on Madam Chair's statement earlier, I am happy to work with the Affordable Housing Trust and steering committees in the meantime before our next meeting to work with the applicant to come up with some options to consider for the board. With that, I have no further comments and I'm seeing none from the audience.
All right. So I can take from the top of what I have in my notes and just reconfirm them quickly so that they get logged. And if there's any clarifications needed with either the applicant, the peer reviewer, or one of the planning board members, that we can do that. So Clark's comments started off and his concern was about various facets of the landscape architecture and architecture. There was a discussion about the height of the building, and there was a discussion about what's the relationship between the two buildings, the extent to which the building opposite the large structure is going to also be a large structure, and the extent to which we have more information on that because it's going into a pre-existing neighborhood. We had a discussion on the sort of philosophy of inclusionary zoning, and the conclusion of that conversation is that the planning board has a responsibility as the first application of inclusionary zoning to work with the developer, and also at the same time to be mindful of precedents that could be set because it's the first time, when we want to go carefully. We want to be very, very deliberate about what we're doing. We talked about then there was a lot of discussion, little small pieces of information about things like HVAC, about any other sort of hard infrastructure that was going to be put in place. How was that going to be in place? How is it going to be screened? There was not any discussion of any extent about things like sidewalks, although all of the sidewalks around the structure are basically long past due their age, so they're going to need to be replaced. And in the next round of our discussions, we could have more detail with that. There was a lot of discussion about the flat roofs and the extent to which that changes the height of the building. The underground parking regulations were discussed. Questions about ventilation and access were raised there. Other issues that came up related to the landscaping, the extent there could be flooding, and how will that be maintained, issues of lighting and walkways, verification of location of trees, maintenance plans for the area that will be a public area, and any area that would otherwise be not held within the condominium association. There needs to be a plan for that. There needs to be a plan for signage and service loading areas. The two loading areas may not comport with what the current practice is, which is to have lots of things delivered to your home for very basic goods, and two locations. We want to think about the size of them and their placement. There was a comment about the location of the kitchen stacks for any kind of large group food production facility, such as a restaurant. And then finally, we ended on with our discussion on inclusionary zoning. I didn't put a number on all of these items. Are there any other items that people can remember that we talked about and requested information about that I did not touch on in some way? I don't see anybody responding. So Lauren, at this point, would you like to offer a direction as to where we go next?
Yes, thank you. So for our next meeting, the planning board schedule in September is scheduled for September 9th and September 23rd. I will say that there are a series of other topics that need to be addressed by the planning board at the September 9th meeting. It's also a very short turnaround time for the applicant to respond and the peer reviewer to circle back. So what I would suggest is that we continue this to September 23rd. We have no other additional items scheduled for that meeting, so I would suggest that, similar to tonight, we dedicate that meeting solely to this project so that we can effectively have a conversation and address everything that we need to do.
All right, Clark Brewer.
You want a motion?
Well, I want to make sure that what we've just said is going to work for the applicant, and whether or not the timing might need to be adjusted because it is a short fuse between now and the 9th. And we may have other business we could take up, but I want to make sure that we're not crowding them, so they're going to be able to come back to us. They had 36 items before, they've been reduced down, but they've got another 36 probably now.
Amy, I thought we were continuing to the 23rd.
Did I say 9th?
You did.
Yeah, sorry, I meant the 23rd.
George had something to say about that, so I think we should see what he has to say.
Madam Chair, we're okay with the 23rd. I counted 14 items today. I know we clicked off a lot of the 36, so there's a lot that we have to do, but we will be able to do that and address them on the 23rd.
Okay, so one of the requests that we would make so that we can absolutely kind of start closing some things is if you could give us a list of your 36 original plus your 14 that you understood. What we'll do is go through that and circulate it amongst ourselves and make sure that that is the list that we had conversations with in the last 2 meetings. And if any other items come in to us from citizens, we would, include that information with you or to you so that we basically are constantly accumulating and having a complete list, because we've got enough to keep it's a lot to keep in our heads. Eve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that, I think it's a great idea for the applicant to provide you with a list, but I don't think you can circulate it amongst the board members to have comments outside of the public meeting. Karis is not here, so I'm trying to maybe play her role, but I am not an attorney. So if anyone is an attorney and they want to have a say, I think that they'll provide you with the information, and then perhaps the staff can get back to the developer. But I don't want it to be a conversation online.
Right, I agree with that. It's really simply to have a check for people so that their items are recognized, and then if there's items that they feel weren't recognized, that will go to Lauren. She'll aggregate all that information, and it will go either in a pile, or it'll go as individuals actually get that information to Lauren. But it won't go individual board members, and it will not be discussed. Thanks for the reminder, though. Anything further? Clark Brewer?
I just want to follow up on this commercial component thing, because I've done some thinking about this over since the last meeting. To me, the 10% or less than the 10% has been a deal breaker for this project in my thinking, because when we did the bylaw, we talked about it. The goal was to create a village business district that had a residential component, but that had a robust, vibrant business component that was compatible with the residential uses. And I've heard what the developers said, and they brought up that the uptake of commercial space at like Marina Bay has been slow. But I still think that there's places, like in Oak Bluffs and Edgartown, Vineyard Haven over on Nantucket, basically the whole Cape that have sort of a seasonal aspect to what they do, or there's things that happen commercially in the summer, spring, summer, and fall that don't happen in the winter. And I acknowledge that this site and this town, to some extent, things slow down in the winter, and it would be hard to have outdoor businesses. It would be hard to make the kiosks work year round. But I still think it's implicit on the developer to create a scenario that would work commercially, be as robust as possible. So I would encourage the developer to find models that they think could work on a seasonal basis here, and create the most robust, vibrant armature for that. And if it's under the 10%, that may be okay, provided that the developer does their homework and fully tries to make that work. There may need to be a separate commercial owners association, or a commercial association separate from the homeowners, because their goals and interests are going to be different. The homeowners are going to want all the businesses to open at noon and close at 4 p.m. So, I mean, that kind of level of thinking, the signage, how many hours of operation, how those sometimes not compatible uses. How do they coexist? And the some of the issues of privacy, the semi-private, semi-public, and public aspects of the project, I would expect your architect could help you to try and get a handle on those zones. But my expectation is that you use this project to make the most robust commercial, the most vibrant waterfront that's fun and a destination for people out of town and in town. And that's just the one follow-up I wanted on our comments last time. Thank
All
you.
right, George McGoldrich and then Tom Callahan.
So just quickly, not to spend a whole lot of time on this because it is a topic of discussion for the future, is we did look at numerous seaside villages, and the majority of them were seasonal. Majority of them told us that they don't work in the wintertime, they close up in the wintertime. Dribbles down in Situate closes in the wintertime. We looked at a lot of different towns. The reason we showed you Marina Bay was we thought that was the one that had the most vibrancy because it was larger, close to the city, bigger population, and that doesn't even work. So we've heard from the abutters, we've heard from neighbors, we've talked to other towns, we've talked to other planners, and the park, creating the park where people 0 to 100 will use it. That's the vibrancy that we've been told is what not only the abutters, neighbors, and town residents want, but that works in other areas. And we're not getting rid of the commercial space, but we're just saying that after a certain point of square footage, it just will not be used. And as I said to you last time, the one guy that leases all the retail space in Cohasset told us he didn't think he'd get anybody down there. So we are, and we will show you how we're making it vibrant. It may be 6 uses in bricks and mortar and 3 or 4 kiosks, but that may not be exactly 10%. So I appreciate the fact that you're willing to listen to what we're doing, but please understand that in the Zoom format, we don't have the time and the ability to stand in front of you with hundreds of different slides. We're on a short time frame. It's tough to get it done. So we will prove to you why we think what we're doing is creating the vibrancy. Because again, don't forget the biggest issue about bricks and mortar is we can't control who goes in there. We can't say it's got to be an ice cream shop. We can't say it's got to be a coffee shop with a space because Jim Norton from Norton Healthcare can do what he's been doing all over town, including across the street from us here on Elm Street, and take it for office space. And that defeats the whole vibrancy. So I just want to make the point that we didn't just look at one area. We've looked at numerous areas. Pompanesett, up and down Newport, Newburyport. There's lots of places. And the answer is we're not San Diego. That's the problem. But we're working on it, and we'll get a solution that everyone realizes is going to work for the town. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom Callahan.
I have 2 different points. On the affordable housing, as I was sitting here, I had mentioned in the past I had been involved in creation of condominiums in the city that were mixed income. And I just typed in mixed income condominiums, and what came up as one project is the West End in Boston. And that is a mixed use, mixed income condominium project. And I'm just saying, as we're deciding whether to build off-site, where we continue to add to the denominator of housing units in town, or build on-site, it's not impossible that condos exist. It's not unheard of that condos exist with mixed incomes, and they exist successfully. And I understand your point earlier, George, but I don't particularly buy it either, because these other places do in fact exist. On Clark's point, I kind of support where Clark is coming from, but the Zoom thing is bad. It's not the same way of doing things, but one of the legal issues that I was thinking about earlier today, we still haven't resolved, is whether we have the power to grant waivers. And I do some of this kind of work for a living. I'm very doubtful of that, where it's not specifically stated in the bylaw. And whether we end up, the legal opinions between Adam, Karis, myself, whoever else, if we say we can do waivers, we're still going to need a basis for it. And even though Zoom is unnatural, we need that data that you've seen in whatever brief as brief but as detailed form you can give us, George. I know Situate Village, Situate Harbor is different than our harbor, but it also doesn't die in the wintertime. So I know there are places that can survive. And I'm not suggesting what the right mix is here. And I understand your problem. I understand Clark's perspective. But I was more taken aback by saying, well, it's because of Zoom, we can't get all this data to you. We have to find a way to get this data so that we can make a sound decision either way. And especially where our power of waiver is, I think, legally up in the air at the moment.
All right, thank you, Tom. Eve, would you like to comment on the question of the waiver?
No, she's a lawyer. I'm sorry, no disrespect.
I am not an attorney. I have, so from the perspective of a legal, I thought I read it in the, I don't have it in front of me right now. I believe it is actually in the bylaw, the harbor overlay zone, that you can get, that the planning board can allow less than the 10% commercial if they see fit for whatever reason. I do believe, and Lauren can correct me if I'm wrong, that Karis is on this for us in writing a legal brief. She just hasn't gotten to it yet.
That's right, Eve. There is a waiver option for the 10% minimum, but it assumes that it makes the assumption that we've that the developer's done their homework and provided something in exchange.
Right. I mean, I'm saying that you can, I think the question was, is the planning board permitted to grant a waiver if they see fit? I think that it's in the bylaw, but I am not an attorney, so don't take my legal word for it.
It's not here. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I don't see it.
In the overlay zone.
Yes, I'm looking at it right now.
I'm gonna keep looking.
Okay, so
I'm not trying to create a problem. I want to get the best
Right.
project.
I believe it's there. I will take a look, but Karis is on it. I believe she just isn't here tonight and hasn't written something, and she is the town's attorney. So I think that's probably where we want to leave it for now.
Okay, great. So Jen and then Adam Brodsky.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to mention, I haven't spoken this evening, but we do have Cindy Amara here from Karis. They work together. She is our counsel on this meeting. So she is here if you'd like to just, Cindy, did you just want to say something? And then I know that I believe Karis is working on the waiver question. So, but I feel remiss that I did not mention that Cindy was on here earlier. I've been sort of mute. So Madam Chair,
I'm
if you
sorry,
want.
I didn't actually know who she was. So.
Okay, that's okay. That's my doing. I'll take the onus on that. So we do have, excuse me, special counsel on the meeting.
You're muted, Cindy.
I will talk to Karis about this tomorrow and make sure that she is working on this. And if she has not begun it, I'll take a closer look at it, and the two of us will be in touch with Lauren and Jen and get back to you on that. I know in a lot of towns, waivers of certain types of similar requirements are authorized. So, and I do also agree that it is something that you have to be convinced is in the best interest. So we will be on top of that, and I will speak with Karis tomorrow about it.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks, and nice to meet you belatedly. Adam?
Madam Chair, good evening. Adam Brodsky, counsel for the applicant. I just want to let you know that Karis and I are actively working on this issue. And in fact, I have a conference call scheduled with her tomorrow. She's been away on holiday, and so she's been very responsive. So we'll be in a position to speak to those issues the next time we meet.
All right, thank you, Lauren.
I apologize for neglecting to introduce Cindy Amara earlier. Thank you, Jen. And yes, I just wanted to follow up that this meeting tonight actually was not in our original schedule, which is why Karis was unable to, when we added it on August 5th, she was unable to turn around in advance of this meeting. But she, as Adam just stated, is working on this and will have an opinion for us.
All right. Are there any other comments from the members of the meeting? Jen?
I just wanted to just bring to attention that we should probably discuss what the planning board would like submitted prior to the 23rd, and so that we can work on dates backwards from the meeting so there's enough review time.
Okay, so my understanding is we have whatever the list is that was in the last meeting that we had. Then this meeting, the combination of those two pieces of a discussion which led to a set of issues to be addressed. That's what we have as accumulated. Are you asking then, are there other issues that the planning board members would like to address?
I'm asking if what deliverables we're expecting, or are we going to be getting a new plan set, and when that would be, addressing those questions.
Okay, that's directed to the developers.
So just wondering if we're going to be getting it, because we did this meeting to address all of the major issues, and then we were going to get, I believe, an updated set of plans for review.
Right, and the peer reviewers review that material too, so we have to take that into account.
Right, I just want to get a handle on the time frames for everybody.
Okay, so Ted and George, do you have some comments about timing?
So it's our intention to answer the majority of the questions that we can. Some of the questions, a few of them were things that would really be dealt with in the building permit set. So some of the very technical things. A couple of things that if we can't answer, you would make conditions on. The majority of them, though, we will be looking to answer, and we'll have that before the 23rd. So, Jen, is it how many days before the 23rd do you need to see something?
5.
Yep. Okay.
Well, so we want to see it, but then we want our peer reviewers to review it. Isn't that correct, Lauren?
That's correct.
So we have to build that in. So I would direct that to Darren to say what kind of time frame would you need. So if we look at the days, I just want to make sure we all have a time frame.
Yep.
Because
Right,
so
no, that's definitely helpful. Right, so if the meeting's on the 23rd, I guess because we're also required to provide our documents 48 hours before the meeting, so I think we need, like, not the 16th, but at least 14th, or preferably the 11th. If that's doable, I know there's Labor Day, the holidays coming up too, so.
So you're suggesting that the developer provide you with the information by the 14th, that would provide you with the time necessary to review the materials. You would provide those materials to us 2 days before the meeting. Is that what you're saying? That's a little bit tight, perhaps.
I guess, I mean, the 11th would be preferable, just to give us 2 more days to look at it, but we can work with whatever, or if there's like a staggered tranche of documents, that may be another way to do it.
Lauren?
May I ask a question? And this is a question directed at the applicant. Do you feel that you need to have a revised set of plans to us for the next meeting? Or do you feel that there's items that can be addressed at the next meeting and a revised plan set could be in order for the 1st October meeting?
That's probably what's going to happen.
Okay. The reason I ask is I think that there's things that can still be addressed without a full set of revised plans. I think there's a lot of things. I mean, in the meantime, we need to discuss the affordable housing component and have that really squared away. So that would be my suggestion to without further delay in our schedule.
So what would you bracket in as the most likely information that we would be able to discuss in the next meeting, recognizing that some of the things that have been discovered in the initial meeting and this meeting will take longer to resolve than the time necessary to get the materials to the peer review? Can we name categories of materials, topics that we think we could resolve to come back together?
Without having the full team sitting in a room deciding who can get what done at what time, I can't give you a specific answer tonight, but we will get back to Lauren and Jen as soon as possible. That's,
Tom?
I apologize, I'm going a little off base here. I didn't think of this question earlier. Maybe somebody can answer it quickly or provide it. I don't understand. Provide it for the next meeting. What's the total lot coverage of these buildings? Are you have an idea what the percentage is?
yeah,
John Cavanaro, do you have that available on your plan?
If it's already on the plan, I'll find it, but I was, in addition to height, my concern about the size is footprint and what,
John, you're muted.
John, you're muted.
John, you're muted.
Of the cover plans right now. Actually, lot coverage is.
Sorry, but you sound like you're on a spaceship.
Oh, you can hear me? Is that okay? What coverage is on the title sheet?
You're incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible.
Sorry, you want to type?
Madam Chair, I think he's trying to say the lot coverage is on the site plan set.
all right, that's fine.
All right.
That's fine for now.
I'm glad that we could get that one right. Darren?
I guess just a few items that, so I know we talked about for flooding, the structural drawings exist. So if those could be forwarded to us once, I'm sorry, I'm also having the same echo, in the near term. And then I guess the building height too, if there's just a section view showing the roof elevation, just because that's not the flat roof portions, like if that's a hidden line behind the ridge line, we just want to see where that is and have that calculation. And then, so that covers the flooding, that covers building height, which are the main concerns of today's meeting. And then the affordable housing is obviously a larger discussion, so.
All right, has that been captured so that the applicants are aware of those items? Okay,
One point of clarity on the structural drawings. We do not have actual structural drawings at this point. We have got a structural narrative about how the building or the foundation would be constructed. The other point of clarity to answer the lot coverage question, it is on the title sheet. So structural coverage required under the zoning is 80%. On the 124.
I said I found it. I found it, and I'm sorry I asked the question and didn't think of it earlier, but I found it. Thanks very much.
All right, perfect.
Other items? All right, so I'll just make one last comment, which is there was a discussion last time we met about actually meeting at the site and with spray paint or other mechanism, drawing out the perimeter of the structure. And I just want to underscore that because that was an item that was discussed significantly in the first meeting.
we'll there's a, so you're talking about the parking lot area right? Because you can't draw it in the hotel, so.
Right. It's really the back end. It's the back end.
Outside of the building, we can draw something? Sorry.
Well, I mean, if you just want to get a sense of this, the change in what the density is of the building, we could just go out with spray cans and actually mark where the building was going to go.
Okay, sure. I mean,
For example,
it'll be along the lot line with all the carve outs and stuff, but we can do something like that, sure.
I mean, is the new building going to be along the existing fence that's on Margin Street? Is it going to be right up to that fence line?
I don't know if it's right up next to it, but it's close to that, yes.
Okay.
All right, so if we could arrange that, that was something that Ambrose brought up, and
Sure.
that will, the more realistic things can be, the more.
George, you could get a couple of hundred cones from DPW or something like that to lay them out on that back edge, that waterside edge to the extent possible, rather than messing up your parking lot permanently.
Beautiful parking lot.
Yeah, people parking all crazy for the next 6 months.
So,
Just a suggestion.
Clark, are you talking, I mean, we're so focused on the street and yet the whole idea of this is to open up the harbor. So I'm kind of confused. Are you talking about the harbor side?
Yeah, I don't know why he said, I am thinking of the street side. That was what was discussed in the first meeting.
Yeah, we'll either do cones or we'll paint something, but yes, it's going to be right up against the street as allowed under the zoning. It's going to be within the height of the zoning, but it's going to be away from the water. So I'd rather take it to the water side and show you what we're going to get over there too. We'll make it a whole site visit.
All right, that sounds satisfactory for the members that are interested in this.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Any other comments? Then we can draw this meeting to a close. Lauren? Eric?
Sorry, just,
Oh, sorry. Lauren first and then Eric.
thank you. I just want to remind the members that we need to, before we draw the meeting to a close, we need to continue this to a date and time certain. I would suggest September 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Before you make a motion, I also just want to remind you that we have minutes to approve for the board before concluding the meeting. Jen has a list, so after the motion to continue this is done, we can go over the minutes that need to be approved.
All right. So can I get a motion to continue?
So moved to September 23rd at 6:30.
All right, I want to have a name call, roll call.
Second. I'll second it.
Name, please.
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Paul Colery,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Well, thank you all. We can conclude this part of the meeting and now we will do our business.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
All these people leaving. This is amazing. I'm intrigued by all this, I guess.
Paul Colery
This is
looks like a
amazing.
giant.
Mass exodus here.
I'm hanging in there, hanging in there.
Okay.
I think Mr. Reardon has a question.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was just waving goodbye.
Oh, all right.
Part of the mass
you.
exodus.
Okay.
It did take me a long time to add panelists today.
Okay, great. So I want to make just a quick clarification. I sent the email to you all about the discussion, the planned discussion of the legal issues related to the CHI site that was put on the selectmen's agenda 2 weeks ago when they thought that they might need to have some type of approval to allow Caris North to receive the information from Mr. Durentis that was provided to the Board of Selectmen as a first cut for the discussion of the ownership of the CHI properties. That issue has now been resolved, partly because the information that was needed was transferred to Caris, and she is working on that. And the second is that Adam Bronsky and others have suggested that the issue of title has been resolved on the part of the applicant. Tom?
Yeah, when George said that, I quickly went on the registry of deeds site, and yes, he bought he's got title to the property as of the 11th.
Okay.
So, the ownership muddle because Ortolhide was still involved is really a moot point at this point. However, what I also found out was, that Peter Roy did get his attachment, but I can't believe George's group would close on the property if that was a threat. So I'm assuming that Roy's attachment is going either to the proceeds Ortolhide is getting or some other assets of Ortolhide, and So Peter Roy's lawsuit is probably also not a threat to this property, and mucking up the works at some point. I just, George can clarify that, but it would be beyond comprehension that he would have closed on the property at the price that he closed for, without that all being assured that it wasn't going to affect the property. He took title to the two pieces of property from Wardlehide, and then there's, I guess, a small parcel up in that northwest corner along Margin Street that he took title to that from Roy. So he was dealing with both of them, and I got to believe that all those issues and legal threats to the property are all gone away at this point.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Jen, would you like to run through the minutes that we need to approve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, they are. They go way back. I was behind. March 18th, 2020, April 15th, 2020, May 11th, 2020, May 20th, 2020, and June 3rd, 2020. I still owe you other minutes beyond that.
All right, may I get a motion to approve minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor, say your name.
Second, I mean.
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan?
I wasn't there, but yeah, I.
Oh yeah, you can't vote.
I'm sure they're perfect.
Eric Potter, aye.
Paul Grady?
Paul Grady, aye.
Paul Caleri?
Aye.
All right, great. Is there any final words, Lauren or Jen, that you want to provide us as we wait for the materials that we're expecting from the developer in September?
I have no updates for you relative to this project. I will just give a quick update. We are in the state. Oh, Eric has a comment.
Well, you can go ahead, Lauren. Just a quick question. I just wanted to clarify when you're done, but go ahead.
Okay, just quickly, I just wanted to let you know that we are in state final review process for a series of plans, including housing production, including open space and recreation. Again, we've been back and forth with their conditional approval. We have our hazard mitigation plan. We got notice from FEMA today that it's been approved by them. I need to do one more step with the select board, and that will be updated. And what else? Last night, the MassWorks, the select board did vote to support the MassWorks grant, so we will be moving forward with an application that's due on Friday. That is for the infrastructure project over relative to 390 Chief Justice Cushing Highway for the sewer connection. So that application will be going in, not necessarily that we'll receive it, but that's the latest for now.
Okay. Tom, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I just want to clarify what we're going to discuss on the 9th, because
there is no meeting on the 9th, right?
Oh, yes. No, I'm sorry. There is a meeting on the 9th. We will be doing the large home review for 580 Jerusalem Road. We'll have a larger discussion of large home review in general. That is the day we continued 8 James Lane and 2 Pleasant Street. And we may have a scenic roads application to be determined.
I'll just tell everybody that in response to Bob's email about the large home review, he and I had a very long and interesting discussion about it. I know where it's coming from, so I hope we have enough time on the 9th to really have a discussion about that going forward. And the other thing that I've mentioned to Lauren offline is that the open space committee that I'm on is interested in knowing that its proposed zoning bylaw that was put off from the annual town meeting would go forward in the fall town meeting whenever they're planning to do it. And I think we should start preparing for that and any other zoning bylaw things that may be coming up.
I can also report on the Master Plan Implementation Committee. There are 5 topics that are key: affordable housing, economic development, the Elm Street corridor, the sewer, and the zoning ordinance change. So those are the foci of the implementation plan Master Plan Implementation Committee. And in regard to that, several working groups have been set up to start tackling the underlying issues in each one of those topics. Not everyone has a working group. Economic Development has a working group. There's going to be a working group for the zoning. There's going to be a working group. We sort of think of the Affordable Housing Trust as the working group. Elm Street has a working group. But I think that the sewer doesn't have a working group yet.
Right, they're working on it. They have not established it yet.
Right, but Paul Colery agreed to be on that committee. So we're getting closer to that committee. Okay, so it looks like Eric just left.
The tie-in of Elm Street, to this project, Mark brought it up at, I think, the first meeting on the harbor project. I don't want to lose that issue either. If there's something we can get from the developer to help the redesign of that intersection, that would be a great thing.
Yeah, this is the time for that.
And I just throw that out as idea, not to deliberate it at this point, but I just hope it's something we don't forget about.
Well, in the meantime, people can be looking at examples of these kinds of arrangements. This is not an uncommon arrangement in a development project. So, okay, well, it looks like we're going to make it before 9:30. Yay, there we go. All right. So may I get a motion, please, to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Paul Grady, please. Paul Colery. Amy Glassmeyer. Looks like we've got everybody that we need. So the meeting for the 26th of August, Cohasset Planning Board is now closed.
Night all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.